Welcome along. You are here with Maree and Marty for another week of Media Matters. Welcome back, Marty. You
Thanks very
had a
much.
week off. Yeah, you had a week off in Matawai,
Mm.
our old ancestral home.
Turangawawa?
Yeah, in the Waiwai last week. And so, of course, Rachel was in the hot seat. We had a great old week. Good to have you back.
Thank you.
And you're is it a fast or a hunger strike, or are you doing your bit for the fuel
Oh,
crisis, Marty? What's going on?
well, it's something that I'm doing a 7-day fast. So I started out for the first couple of days eating sardines, which gets you into ketosis more. But yeah, it's something I felt I wanted to do, and there's a few of us doing it together, by which I mean my church.
Yeah. So
The
I
fasting and
have.
praying.
So I mentioned this to Mr. Maree before I jumped out
Well,
here. I said, he
it'll be
goes, say
horrifying.
hi to Marty for me. And I said, did you know he's doing a 7-day fast? To which you got up because Phil's idea of actually fasting is missing a meal. And that is just, the most unnatural thing in the world. 7 days, just, he
Yeah,
he couldn't be thinking it.
I'll tell you something that occurred to me this morning was it reminded me a bit of when you have a near-death experience, you everything about life is sweet. You just want a bit more. And when you stop eating, you feel that about food, like even like cutting up the old fairy chums hound log or possum, I'm thinking, it's quite good in that you feel the animal that you're riding around in, and it has its own agenda, and that's to stay alive and to eat food. So the idea is by overcoming that, you can move more into the part of yours that's riding around in the animal rather than being sort of. But yeah,
Yes.
you feel like eating.
Yeah. It's funny you mention that because it's one of the things that I've said, because as we record this, we record, for people that don't know, we record this on a Wednesday, it goes out on a Thursday. And tonight we have another fuel webinar, which will be up now if you're wanting to check that out. And, I've just been looking at all of this stuff and I keep having this feeling that if you were someone who was like us, who was raised in the 1970s as children, the early 80s as teens, you have sort of this inbuilt resilience. You had holidays back up the farm at Matawai, you spent time with your grandfather, he taught you those skills about not wasting anything, the necessity of survival and all of that, not taking things and life for granted.
Yeah, I've
And
spoken about that generation gap where we had contact with people who survived the Great Depression, and we also read books is the other thing. So carry on. Sorry.
Yes, no, and now with this sort of, because I had a lot of anxiety, and we talked about it on the Backstage Pass. Actually, we did a really lovely, it was a real good girls' natter, the Backstage Pass. Apologies to Mike Meadows, but who gave us a bit of jibe about it. But we had 4 fantastic women. It was me, Nat, Tamara, and Jackie from who are regional coordinators for VFF, and we talked about that anxiety. I had the anxiety at the beginning. That anxiety now for me has subsided. And it subsided because I think it's not actually about how many days of fuel we have in reserve or any of those things. What it is that we're now on the precipice of this reshifting, I believe, of power, who holds the power, but also supply. And we've become groomed and lazy to actually have that convenience of having what we want when we want. We don't actually cherish what it is when we do have it. So there's no value applied to it. It's become very disposable, hasn't it? Life and things, very disposable. And I think your fast brings that back into focus, doesn't it? Where it tells you that the most rudimentary things for life, like food, is something not to be taken for granted.
Yeah. I mean, It certainly does that. But I mean, I don't know how optimistic I am generally. I've been in a bit of a state of resigned despair that stems from a profound sense of disconnection from the disposable illusion of culture we get
Mm,
through the media, I guess. Um, and as you know, I also despair at the extent to which people seem absorbed in it, or at least deceived by it. And there's the resigned understanding that I'm certainly deceived to some extent also, I guess.
mm,
But yeah, be- most people don't understand the extent to which they're reliant on fossil fuels.
mm,
Most people don't understand that for all the trillions of dollars spent on alternative energy, the total percentage of energy use as fossil fuels only dropped about 0.5%, which isn't to say that um, alternative energy doesn't have its place, but for for when you see the fat controllers enthusiastic about something for the environment, and they're the ones often driving the destruction of the environment, you've got to think, well, what's the ulterior motive there?
mm, mm. Indeed. Now, you said to me that you felt that there was an overlying theme with stuff that we looked at of stupidity versus evil. I, for me, it almost appeared like selfishness versus evil, and and you was just saying in terms of the fat controllers, I think that they've gotten, if we're going to use an animal farm analogy, they've gotten everybody really fattened up. They've been working them away. They've got them all nice and fattened up, and now the crunch is going to come, and people will conform and do things because they've become so fat, so comfortable, so lazy, so stupid that they will do anything to get the comfort to which they have become accustomed maintained. What are some of the
Yeah.
things that you've seen evidenced in that in the media this week in terms of stories?
Oh, in the media this week, well, I mean, certainly we've talked about the declining birth rate. I mean, overall, I mean, you can look at a basic assumption, and for me, the place you've got to start is realizing there are people who privately own the Federal Reserve in America and most central banks,
Mm,
and they've gathered immense wealth through usury, which has created debt that can never be paid back. So that's where pretty. And if you start from there, it cascades down from there in terms of the material world that's ruled by Satan. If you want to use that lens, which I find fits quite nicely. Um, and they control everything. They control governments, they control corporations, they control the media. So what the media says goes through that pinhole camera of what's in their interests. Their instinct seems to me to be evil rather than good. Even when there is a pretense of doing good, as I mentioned earlier with the climate stuff, um, that ultimately appears oriented towards destroying nations, destroying culture, and replacing them with a creepy, satanic, globo-homo, anti-human neo-feudalism.
right,
Um,
say that 3 times fast out loud.
yeah. So,
Mm,
so I watch the news through that lens, that
yeah.
everything that's on the news is stuff that they are okay with being on the news. Almost everything. I used to think there was a democratic solution, that we could get a certain proportion of people behind a new way of working together. But I think we've long since passed that.
Mm,
They've studied us, the Milgram experiment, the Ash experiment, the Stanford prison experiment, and they worked out how to game democracy, and they steered natural, patriotic leaders away from political leadership and installed amoral midwit corporate drones like Lux and Ardern and Key.
mm.
I'm
Well,
just
it's be
seeing, I saw a post that Key, that was linked to the Snowden, that Key was lying when he said that he wasn't getting Palantir, who was owned by Peter Thiel, who he granted citizenship, wasn't giving them access to all our data and all Five Eyes stuff so they could pull it out. It's a lot deeper and more horrifying.
Mm,
And maybe I've dipped into that a bit much, so it's made me,
mm,
you've got to dip out of it. You can only spend so
mm.
long.
Yeah, you can only spend so long, and see. So, I mean, you looking at that lens. One of the things that because of course I look at things from a lot of the cultural stuff as opposed to a theological sort of space, and what reminded me just looking at a number of things, which we're going to dip into now, was a interview that I did with a woman called Julie Behling, which was last year. She had a documentary called Beneath Sheep's Clothing, which is about that infiltration of communism. And, there are 5 pillars that you need to essentially control in order to control everything. And the 5 pillars, we've talked about this before, but it's worth to think about this again. Those 5 pillars are the church, education, media, family, and the judiciary. Okay, those are your
Yeah.
5 pillars. If you've got complete ideological control of those 5 pillars, you've got control essentially of everything. And we're far down the way of having control of those. No, so family is one that I know that you and I have been very, very interested in over the years. And Stats New Zealand put out some really interesting figures. I mean, we've talked about the falling birth rate extensively. Last week with Rachel, we talked about a Derek Cheng piece around that falling birth rate. I mean, there is the Stephen Shaw documentary Birth Gap is well worth watching. We are not having babies. And everybody has a birth gap. I don't think there may only be 1 or 2 nations in the world that isn't having massive declining rates in fertility. So this just isn't a first world, third world sort of problem. There is an issue there. Now, in that documentary, in the Birth Gap documentary, it isn't about those families or those mothers who are actually having children. When Shaw looked at those numbers in a number of countries, once you start having children, you tend to continue to have children at exactly the same proportions that it has always been. The issue is beginning to start having children. So it's the childlessness that is the real crux of the problem. Now, Stats New Zealand put out data on marriages this week. And that I found incredibly fascinating because those, in light of all the talk on immigration, let's look at marriage. Now, marriage peaked in this country in 1971, which kind of makes sense because all those kids born out of the baby boom were just hitting their early 20s. So it's from about the period of 1966 through to 1974, there was a lot of ding dong, off to the church we go, carrying on. And that peak was 27,000 marriages. Now, last year we had 17,481, a 3% drop on the year before. But here's the thing that freaked me out, Marty, on the rate of marriages, bearing in mind our population. In 1971, it was 45.5 marriages per thousand. In 2000, it was 15.5 marriages per thousand. Last year, it was only 7.6 marriages per thousand. Now, even if you're not in a marriage and you say, well, you don't need to be married to have a family. Yes, I get that. But marriage is still an institution that is quite vital, I believe, for healthy families, for families sticking together, for creating a structure for a positive family environment. When you look at those numbers, no wonder people aren't starting families and having children.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at the decline in generation size through reproduction rates, and so fertility rate for Norway is 1.4. And so today, say if there's 100 people, generation 1 there's 67, generation 2 there's 45, generation 3 there's 30, generation 4 there's 20. If you look at South Korea, it goes 100, next generation 33, 11, 4, and by fourth generation it's one,
Mm-hmm.
one person.
Yeah.
So I mean, I've just quoted, and I must refresh this because it's something I found myself going back to a fair bit. But Western civilization is a cut flower civilization. It's detached from its roots. And I mean, as I've said, a year ago, it would have surprised myself if I was speaking this way. But I mean, just happened as I was flicking around came across a German author was talking about in 19 Benjamin Kaiser was talking about Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He said in 1978, Gulag survivor Alexander Solzhenitsyn predicted the swift downfall of Western civilization in his famous Harvard speech. Contrary to the expected paean of praise, this guy just got out of Soviet gulags, right? He delivered a sharp reckoning with the free West, which, should fundamental course corrections not be made, would collapse within a few decades. All of this is evident to numerous observers from every region of our planet. It is becoming ever less likely that the Western way of life will become the globally leading model. There are obvious signs by which, in history, threatened or declining societies could be recognized. Such signs include the decline of the arts or the absence of significant statesmen. In fact, however, the warning signs are clearer and more obvious. So he's talking about how the era occurred 500 years ago with the foundation of modern thinking. So he said, I'm referring to the prevailing Western worldview that across the Renaissance, I'm referring to humanism, the proclaimed autonomy of man from any higher power. This had detached man from God, from truth, from beauty, and from an objective morality. For the Western man, all of this became purely subjective factors and thereby relativized. As a result, the Western man degenerated in modernity. So he saw the only solution in a return to faith in a transcendental morality under God. Cultures that do not respect the true, the good, and the beautiful will perish. Anyone who wants to save the West must begin by beautifying his soul, for in this way one lives well and begins to make civilization itself beautiful again.
Mm. Yeah, that is definitely food for thought, isn't it? Well, I have to admit, I looked at these marriage rate numbers and I'm actually going to send this graph through to the team so they can pop it up on the screen for us. It, it was really quite concerning because, as you're saying, there is this decline, there is this detachment. And, for someone like me, I don't, as I've said to you, I don't carry faith. I like to call myself faith adjacent. But even I can see the untethering. So if I can see the untethering, I guess, why aren't so many others? Well, they aren't because they are those ones in the village that don't want to see it. The Helen Clarke Foundation, did you clock her report that came
Yeah, I
out,
did.
Old
Yeah.
Snaggletooth's last week?
Yeah.
So when you dive into the report, there's a
She
whole
cut the
bunch in there
brake lines and then just go, oh, this has crashed.
Yeah. There's a whole bunch in there that I, certainly did not agree with. Well, there was the data was solid. The conclusions they drew from the data, I was like, can you please get your
What
head
do
out
we
of
need
your
more
anuses now,
Fabian
people?
socialism?
I know. However, they broke these three groups and they had 24%, which they called the connected group. Then they had, was it 24, 28? No, 20. So start again, Maree. I think it was 30% was the connected group, 41% were the ambivalent, and then I think it was 28% were the alienated. Now, the alienated fell into two camps. The alienated were probably people like you and I that are noticing stuff and really angry about it and frustrated. But they were also, too, according to their metric, people that sat on the very far left side of the spectrum as well, who through their perspective and worldview and lens, they were also very frustrated at what they were seeing and interpreting. The connecteds were essentially it's all about me. It's all about me. I've got everything that I want. My life is roses. Everything's fabulous. I'm in the space that I need to be and let them eat cake. So that's that group. And then it's the 41% in the middle that were just like, let me get on with my day. How do we permeate that?
The parasite's getting very close to killing the host in terms of the size of government and the debt, as I said earlier. Like we're paying $13 billion a year, I think, to maintain Squealer's billions that he borrowed.
Yeah.
That's just his. I mean, John Key wasn't much better, and Bill English. And certainly the corporate drones aren't much better. So we're in this thing where bankers can make a deal with politicians. Well, look, you can have the money to keep everything seeming like it's on an even track, and the crash is going to be beyond your political career, and we just kick the can down the road. And we've allowed it to happen because I listened to an interview on Leighton Smith, Rodney Hide, who was quoting Karl Popper, saying Karl Popper said of New Zealand, it's one of the best governed countries and most easily governed. And everyone thought, oh, aren't we great? But he was actually, it's not great to be easily governed.
Well, you could replace the word governed with manipulated, couldn't you?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, you talk about those different layers, the far left people. The far left people are told that they're struggling because I'm greedy, or that people who own businesses are greedy. It's a classic thing of in Ukraine where the unsuccessful peasants were told that the kulaks, who were the successful farmers, were exploiting them, and so that just unleashed a tide of rape and murder and hate.
And you
I
can
should
see
add,
where...
actually, sorry, Maree, I should add on top of that, just to sweeten this a bit, Rodney Hide had the opposite view to me somewhat. So it's worth me reading it out just so we're not, making everyone depressed. He said, normally when I've been on your show in the past, I've been terribly pessimistic. I won't do his voice. I've never been more optimistic than I am now. I think we're living in the start of a golden age. I think the world is amazing. I thank God literally every day, obviously for creation, but to be alive today, because we're beating them. Your podcast is possible. This was so close to being lost. When they were regulating Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, do you think that was where it was going to stop? If things had continued on that trajectory, your podcast would have been shut down, and it was a unique individual, the likes of which we've never seen, perhaps not in history, maybe a Julius Caesar or a Napoleon. Even a Rockefeller doesn't come close. Elon Musk bought Twitter and blew the dam up. And once you had one medium that was free, the others had to open up. And so your podcast survives, and that's multiplied millions of times over the world. And we're seeing this much greater debate than we've ever seen before. He makes a good point. The pessimist in me says, well, now the fat controllers know who are going to give them problems. Yeah. And they've got the power to switch off their bank accounts.
Yeah. And that is the thing too, because the last thing they want is that alienated / notices group to start waking the ambivalent group up.
Yeah.
Because they'll be like, oh no, because we've had this power here for so long. Do you know, there was a story I heard that broke with St. John's. So just St. John's have been told by the government, because
don't you mean, Maree?
Oh, yeah, no, I refuse to use that. St. John's, as far as I'm concerned. So don't go be with me. Nicola Willis, bless her, knows that there is, money is tight. So she's obviously been very firm in the budgets that she's given out to these organisations. St. John's contract, this is what we've got. Management have come back and said to save $1.3 million, which on the grand scheme of things isn't heaps, but every mickle makes a muckle, as they say. And so St. John's has realised that cleaning services that they started to enable during the pandemic period, they are now ceasing and only doing outside contracted deep cleaning services once a quarter, and then having paramedic staff to actually just do basic maintenance and cleaning around the stations. To which a spokesperson got very upset, and their name eludes me just for the moment, because, and the quote was that this was just outrageous, because how could you have a paramedic, this was going to harm lives and potentially kill people, because, paramedics may be delayed because they're down on their knees cleaning a toilet, and that could actually have serious impacts. And I'm sure they said this with a straight face. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, really? really, they could be in there copping a squat, and that would take probably longer than what it would to whip off a pair of rubber gloves and jump into the rig to go to an emergency. Wow.
I mean, my
Wow.
thought with that stuff is always, they always talk about cutting services that most New Zealanders agree should be totally government funded. And when you look at that cut, what percentage is it of the money we're borrowing and setting fire to as a burned offering to Luxon's climate fairies?
Mm.
Well,
And culture, and also the cultural spend as well.
Well, and also Squealer's $13 billion a year interest repayments. So, there's always these big giant douche or turd sandwich choices we're given. But
Yeah,
really,
there was a quote that I did with Rachel last week from he's a tradie influencer that in Ireland, and named John McGrath, and he normally doesn't talk about political stuff, but he got a bit upset a few weeks ago, and he said this: the governments are asking us to do more with less, while they do less with more. Well, that's pretty much sums up our crew, doesn't it?
When governments are afraid of people, there's freedom, and when people are afraid of governments, there's tyranny. And so governments have been gradually stacking themselves up power that mean people are afraid. During COVID, there was people were afraid to speak their mind, and unless, just like how this is a whole coalition government aren't marching the proportion of GDP that's government spending back from 44%, is it, to about 25%, which is the agreed sweet spot. But again, the media is either owned or controlled through advertising by the people who are financing that debt, which is gradually putting the screws on us.
Yeah. Well, then, and I think I can't remember, I think this is one that I flicked through to you, because you did right. But even then, when they do finally say something, those that are in that next level of control, so whether it be the medical council, or the health associate councils, the media council, this layer of authority over the freedom to think, move, or speak. The New Zealand Media Council, this is in Stuff. New Zealand Media Council upholds a complaint over Stuff headline on COVID immunity. Now, the headline, wait for it when I find it. The headline said, and now I can't find. Yes, the headline said, it appeared on Stuff's 12th March 2026. The COVID immunity cycle, why catching the virus is basically our new booster. The story explored the new wave of COVID cases and examined whether ongoing booster vaccinations were still necessary, and included expert commentary from the University of Canterbury's Professor Michael Clarke, who explained how immunity from both vaccination and infection wanes over time and why booster shots continue to play an important role. Now, of course, heaven forbid we, tear down natural immunity, but the fact that they've upheld this complaint for the fact that they're saying that you're even, is basically our new booster. It's like the sacred cow. You still cannot admit that something that we've known since the Athenian plague, thousands of years ago, is a reality, because it doesn't sit with the narrative.
Well, I mean, who is John Marshall? I looked for him, couldn't find him. He was the guy who complained. Who is he? He's sort of airily quoted. It's just appalling journalism. It's in the story. It's after they quoted Canterbury Professor Michael Planck, they just go, when John Marshall complained that the head. Well, who are you, John Marshall? Anyone who can make you, is it believe or speak absurdities can make you commit atrocities, as Voltaire said. But yeah, it's just absurd. And if you go back to, this is where they want to take us, where our body, we're blends of machine and human. If you look at the sexual revolutions, the third sexual revolution was individual mate choice on long and short-term markets, effective contraception, legal abortion, gender equality, less marriage, more divorce, increasing single rates, declining fertility, ideals of self-realization through both pair bonding and promiscuous sex. Now, the fourth sexual revolution is AI-driven mate matching, artificial womb technology, sustainable abundance from AI and robotics, gene editing, robot nannies and partners, additional speculative technologies that may influence mating and reproduction. So we're going off into this Tower of Babel, dystopia.
Well, so the whole thing in terms of that promiscuity and the like, because there's this real, we've talked about the creepy interest, right, that education and adults have
Yeah, it
in the
does.
sexuality of our kids, which, you and I have both been very clear about. Funnily enough, Gen Zers are having less sex than anything's had before. And when we look at the sort of generations, I feel for millennials. I feel for millennials because they have got a bum deal. At least us Gen Xers have the ability, as we said earlier, to have access to the knowledge of people of those who were of the silent generation that lived through the Great Depression. Right? So we dealt with those people, we'd spoken to them. If we'd been lucky enough, we had counsel from them within our families. Whereas millennials haven't had that. They've missed out on that. And they haven't necessarily picked up, they sort of have this rebellion against us as if they've had Gen X parents. And then you've had the Gen Zers who are coming along looking at their parents thinking, I mean, you and I are both Gen Xers who have, skipped that generation, and we've thrown our kids straight into the Gen Z pool, and we're certainly getting our licks in there, that's for sure. But there is, this is the optimism, and Rodney and I am. That's where I have always maintained it. I think that I put great stock that particularly the young men in Gen Z, if they're allowed to continue to play with a straight bat and, not get too indoctrinated on the way through, have the ability to actually pull us out of a lot of these cultural issues that we have on our plate today. But they need to be allowed to do it.
Japanese Zen monks used to eat soybeans, used to call them cooling foods because they stopped morning erections, because they tank testosterone. That's one thing that does. They didn't have xenoestrogens in plastics either, or all the plastic stuff they were wearing. It's hard to do that. They're not the same young men because of that. So, maybe the looks maxing thing is interesting, where they're starting to really get serious about mogging each other. So I've been studying this stuff.
Is this the whole Simon Barnett thing? Did you see that?
I knew about mogging before that. I've got.
I didn't hear. Well, I know you've got. Your kids. Yeah, I can definitely tell that your kids would have filled you. And I had no idea what mogging was. I even had. I had to text number 2 because he's the one that's down with the social vernacular, and I had to say to him, "What's this?" And he just came back and went, "Oh, OFS, mum." Yeah. It's poor mother. I'm just hopeless. Hey, now,
I do. I'll tell you who sorry, Maree, but just on that topic, I'll tell you who I've been listening to a bit lately is Nick Fuentes. If you want to hear angry Gen Z.
Oh, yeah, that is angry Gen Z.
You want to hear what that sounds like? Nick Fuentes. And he's so articulate. He's that voice. He is the vanguard of that. And
what worries me about him, though, is he is, how I've talked about that pendulum swing? Yeah. Sometimes you don't want it coming through too thick and too fast at the other side. And Nick Fuentes is, for me, that. He represents that.
I think he makes I
find that a little concerning. Pardon?
I think he makes a lot of sense in places. I enjoy his candor. And,
yeah.
I don't agree necessarily with, he has got this, never had a girlfriend, kind of doesn't see the point in being offline kind of thing. I mean, I don't agree with that. And, the way he says things is provocative. That's kind of his brand. But I enjoy his voice.
Mm.
and I'm not, I'm not squeamish about that.
Yeah. The education, I just want to pivot back to education for a bit because there was a story that broke around, and we've talked about this before, and we heard about it too, actually, when we were both in Foxton, is that there is concern and complaint over the new curriculum. And part of it has been because this curriculum overhaul is massive. Erica Stanford has got the bit between her teeth. She's really trying to, get this curriculum cleaned up and put forward. The attitude from a number within education is, look, just cool your jets, guys, cool your jets. For come November, we'll have a change in government. We won't have to change
Yeah,
a thing. And, even if that's the case, if that's the attitude, if that's what they believe and that's what Labor's going to do, how freaking wasteful is that?
they don't
Right?
care.
With all the work and money that's been spent to create this
With the
curriculum
kids,
without even
it's wasteful of the kids.
Yeah, without
Oh,
even giving it a chance. So there was an article about the submissions. They were complaining about the work and how this can't get put in there. And this is a quote from one of the submitters on the new curriculum, the draft curriculum. A submission from the Bay of Plenty science teachers said the curriculum, so bearing in mind, science teachers, the curriculum's guiding kaupapa of excellence, kaupapa of excellent equitable outcomes reflecting the Treaty of Waitangi, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, is not evident anywhere in the science draft.
I don't know if you knew before I mentioned this, but you know
Mm.
who put all that in there?
Who?
Rosemary Hipkins, Quiffy Hipkins' mummy. She was the policy writer who substituted all that Mātauranga Māori, for maths and science. Yeah, it's, I mean, teachers are just a viper's nest of bad ideas.
Yeah.
They're really the the I have become very annoyed at the education system, and very disdainful of it. I spend a lot of time saying to young people, do not let the education system have a monopoly on your curiosity or your
Mm.
education for that matter. You
Yeah.
can look things up on YouTube, learn to do stuff. If you're curious about something, find out about it so you can explain it to people. And then argue, well, we do that with child learning, but that equitable and Tiriti or Waitangi, we all know that that's not a balanced view of the Treaty of Waitangi. So what they're doing is they're gearing kids up to be that slave, or come and join the team, because if you have a child with one of your slaves, they're not a slave because they've got your mana. I've
Mm.
run through before about the horrifying parallels between Maori leaders' attitudes to slaves and their attitudes to non-Maori taxpayers. In Maori society, about 70% of individuals were slaves. It's
Yeah,
a
which
it's
is a
a
lot.
it's a raiding slave owned, and I know I said 70%. People go, oh, 70% of truck drivers weren't Maori and now they're not Indian. Maybe it's just my go-to number. I think it is about that. I'll see if I can find something. I'll put it in the show notes. But it was a huge proportion. It wasn't
Mm.
great. And you know who the other raiding slave owning culture is that uses sacred anger to get disproportionately hikoi angry when someone
Islam.
messes with the program? Islam.
Mm. Yeah, the connection between Islam and Marty is particularly in terms of hierarchy is quite stark.
It's
It
coming.
is very there. Yeah,
It's
the
coming.
and when you go back to look back to the Helen Clarke Foundation, those three groups, right? Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because I mean, there is this disconnection between Māori elite and everyday Māori, and I get frustrated when they talk about, these issues in terms of health. Māori is still struggling with all these health outcomes, everything, all the money, the tens of millions and billions of dollars that have been thrown into Māori health. Yes, there have been some successes, but the trickle down, where is the trickle down? I mean, I have to admit, I say to people, You need to look at those bastions of the dollars, those that Māori pot, the Māori economy, that Māori pot of gold, in the fact that don't look at them as iwis anymore. They're not iwis, with the exception of Ngāpuhi. They're all corporations. And some of
Yeah.
these corporations do better than others, but they are corporations that get beneficial tax incentives, breaks, and additional funding from the government. And that's the way you need to look at them. They're not big family groups, they're corporations. And some of us are born into those corporations by birthright, but a good majority of us are not. And those that are don't even get access. You know, we're shareholders in that corporation, but they're not good on paying out the dividends. Very good at paying out the corporate salaries, not good at paying out the dividends. And if you actually look at an iwi in that respect, it changes your entire perspective of how they do things.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, iwi trickle down makes neoliberal trickle down look like hooker falls. um, but I mean, I've heard a Māori leader, in a private conversation, said to me, "Well, I figure it's a bit like this trust that they had in Gibson, where they built up resources, and then they could do good stuff with this massive principle." That's the optimistic way of looking at it. I think there's something rotten in the core of that ethno-nationalism that goes against the Treaty of Waitangi. It goes
Yeah.
against that idea we are now one people. It goes against that idea of, okay, you can have your own property and you don't have to worry about someone coming over the hill and butchering you. So you can, rather than spending all your energy on defending against that very likely possibility, you can put it into being hardworking and building your own resources. What the tino rangatiratanga thing means, no matter how they twist it and lie about it, it meant every Englishman's home is his castle. That's what they were giving them. And,
Yes.
we can debate it, but when Willie Jackson, again, put as one of the conditions of the Public Interest Journalism Fund, you can't talk about it in those terms. You can only talk about it. We never ceded sovereignty. It was just to look after those messy park yards. And, we just wanted to.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, now you covered some other stories. Let's go to those because I know you had all your notes, and I want to make sure that we get through it. You took a look at the Hooten this week. I didn't. I also had a look at the Cottrell though from the week that you missed.
So do I.
But if anyone wants to have a look about it, he talked about the Buffalo Principle. I know if you want to check out the Buffalo Principle, because the Buffalo Principle is where they sort of basically they head into a storm, and it was actually quite good. But anyway, continue with the Hooten of what he was looking at in regards to Nicola Willis.
Yeah, he was saying the headline is New Zealand coalition government enters crucial month for survival. So he's saying that Nicola Willis had basically the wisdom of Solomon, was what he said, with dealing with the fuel crisis and how, she's managed it pretty well. He said, yet Willis's wisdom must now exceed merely Solomonic if she is to finalise a budget by May 28th, capable of serving the minimum political requirements of all three coalition partners, not least her own national party, still at risk of losing a quarter of its seats. This year's budget will not and cannot be popular per se. Were Willis to extend the country's credit card limit yet again, National would rightly stand charged of being as politically bankrupt as the country is fiscally. Labour would have won the fiscal argument, promised to spend more again, and the election would be lost. It can't hurt Willis dealing with big spending ministers that presumably ACT would never allow it. And what he speculates is that Winnie is going to be a fly in the ointment. It could basically bring down the government.
In what respect?
Well, he's saying the conflicting. But while that works for National and to some extent ACT, backing a budget that the opposition, unions, welfare industry lobbyists, and the left-wing daily media will dishonestly describe as austerity. Ooh, that annoys me. It doesn't work so well for a populist party like New Zealand First. It must protect every last entitlement of superannuitants, working class families in the provinces, small town conservatives, and its donor community to maintain its trend line in the polls. Ask Peters. Ask
No,
Peters today.
so this. Yep. Sorry,
Sorry.
delay. Continue.
Ask Peters today whether New Zealand First will vote for the budget, and he'll obviously say yes. That may very well happen, but any destabilisation of the coalition and heightened risk it may collapse drives up the price Peters can demand for his support. If he doesn't get what he wants and causes an early election, his supporters have already been told why, because the free trade agreement with India risks Jones's butter chicken tsunami, because Willis is running an austerity program, and after yesterday's Herald exclusive, because Luxon wanted to publicly back the US-Israeli war on Iran. So, yeah, no,
Because the one positioning that he doesn't cover there is that, again, there is, I think, places where tremendous amounts of money can be saved, but they've been venerated to this element. I had this thought when I was lying in bed this morning and preparing for this, is that, and this thought came because this is what I'm thinking is going to be written for Kiwi Farm this week, that Nicola Willis is standing there with her whiteboard, a whole bunch of whiteboards, trying to sort of divvy up this pot, right? The money that they've been given to do less with. She's got this pot of money. She's dividing it up into all these categories. So, you've got core services, you've got infrastructure, you've got jobs in terms of maintaining the public service, you've got cultural appropriation funds in terms of what goes out, whether it be Marty or other cultures per se, arts, and then also too, our sacrifices to the climate fairies. Now, if I had all of those sitting in front of me and with big headline numbers above the top of them, I think it would be quite obvious what is the whole economics high school 101 needs and wants. And there's lots of wants that get.
It is obvious if that's what you're trying to achieve. But if you're just trying to look like you're trying to achieve that, but really you're beholden to the people printing the money, you don't do any of that. You don't use New Zealand's coal to generate its power, to lower its energy costs, to decrease the cost of manufacturing so our exports improve. I mean, all that stuff's so obvious. And you don't say, hey, our soil sequesters more carbon than we emit anyway.
Yeah. So for example, one of the things that Christopher Luxon, when he's fixated on climate change,
laser
is that laser focused, when they say to him, well, are we going to leave Paris? Are we going to reduce these our carbon emissions? Are we going to actually say this is unaffordable for New Zealand? We can't do this anymore. And he retorts back saying, no, we have too many agreements in terms of trade that rely on those things. Well, in light of the Indian FTA, our number 1 and 2 trading partners are the US and China. Now you're going to throw India in the mix. The Europeans, well, they don't know their arsehole from their anuses. I mean, surely now is the time to actually say, you know what, we've actually got these trade agreements and we've now just done another one with the Singaporeans. Why don't we now say, actually, we are going to look after our own sovereignty and needs, because we are at the end of the supply chain and we know we have issues. And if it's the Europeans and the EU that are kicking up Bobsy Die, well, actually, are we going to be able to expand our needs into these markets that won't give a rat's whether we're in Paris, won't give a rat's at how much money we're spending on the climate fairies? Or is he just not bold enough to do that?
If he had New Zealand's interests at heart, rather than the big boy's job he can get, now he's got world leader on his CV with BlackRock and other countries that really want to do anything they can to destroy nations. He would do that, but he doesn't, because his ambition exceeds his intelligence, and he's kind of amoral in his own way.
Or he's been sold a morality.
You could fix New Zealand without too much problem. We're a very productive country. You could basically, if I were doing it, I would deal with unemployment from cost cutting by just ramping up food production, exporting it, making communities that made their own art without government funding, because The first casualty of government-funded comedy is the funny bits, and it's the same with all the art. It's horrendous. It's that
Mm.
sort of absence of beauty that Solzhenitsyn was talking about. It's all ugly.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so you could make a renaissance. The moneylenders won't let it happen, and their
Mm.
man that they're happy to have in there is Christopher Luxon or his ilk. If it wasn't him, it would be someone similar to him.
Mm. Well, and it's also like cutting a knife to the public service. There was something else I read again. I've read so much this week, but it was one, in terms of what's happening right now. We're at the highest rate of liquidations, company liquidations. We're at, in the last year, and a lot of them are hitting the wall. And you've got tax debt. IRD are the ones actually taking a lot of these businesses there that could have been businesses that may have actually have gone there. They had the slush fund with Squealers Billions, kept them going, but they're not paying GST or PAYE or another tax bill. So then finally, IRD are calling time on a lot, which is quite sad. But, that's what is happening. And you now have business, particularly in hospo, that are now looking down the barrel of this another squeeze. They're only just starting to get their feet back under them. They're seeing another squeeze. And one of the things that hospitality businesses, particularly in places like Wellington and Auckland, are calling for is the return to the offices of workers, particularly in the public sector, because a lot of these businesses are based on those people being in the cities where they're employed.
Oh,
And of
I was
course, they're
doing a
not.
job.
They're
I was
gone.
doing a job in Tauranga. I think it was the start of the year. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but and it was right in the middle of Tauranga, and I felt so bad for the restaurant owners there because at about 5, 6 at night, when if you were somewhere else, it would be thronging. There were only a few homeless people wandering around shouting at people because they've got mental illnesses. Um, and just these people behind these counters, all this food prepared that they've paid for, no one coming and eating it. And, I talked to another guy who works in mental health, and he said, "Oh, if I walk past those people, I know what they've done. If people knew, they'd be horrified. Some of them have killed people, people have raped people, they've done horrendous things. Some of them, they're not the sort of people who should be on the
Mm.
streets, but defund the police, abolish
Mm.
prisons, etc."
And we haven't even dived into there's this whole thing going on in Auckland at the moment with the heart of the city and Viv Beck and Chloe and so I mean our son lives right in the centre of Auckland City in an apartment. He actually sent a video last week. A bit of entertainment because he lives directly opposite the Auckland Central Police Station and right next to the city mission. So it's a colourful end of town. Now, Mother Bear, it's a great building, good security cameras everywhere. So Mother Bear quite likes that, and it's very central and handy. So he really likes living there. He's enjoying it, but he sent a video just from his balcony. Just took this video of something that was playing out outside the police station. And I did say to them, I said, "Oh, how do you go at night walking back to the apartment because of all the rough sleepers and all the rest of it?" And he said, "Oh, you've got to be mindful." He said, "But they all know them. This is the thing. Like all the cops know all the regular rough sleepers." He said they all know them by name. And when you walk down his street, there is some lovely sculpture and art, and all the art is highlighting and in a way accepting and glorifying rough sleeping. So, like, there's one which is like a green stone with a thing of a relief of a puffer jacket, and then there's what's the other one? There's another one as well. I mean, it's a beautiful sculpture, but I'm thinking,
Is it?
wow, if you're actually immortalizing this in stone and normalizing it, what does that say?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. I don't want it to sound like I'm ragging on people with mental illness. It's a hard thing to live with. I've
Mm,
actually chaired an organization that helped people with mental illness. But when you take mental illness and you add poor sleep and you add drugs,
It's a dangerous
on top of
combination.
a
Mm.
childhood history of abuse. And and it's that choose life thing. Are we looking after our kids so they don't go on to that?
Yeah, I know.
Um, yeah, it's a tough thing, but as I said, I mean, it could be you could solve a lot of those things. I mean, we probably need inpatient mental health care. The problem that you've always had with it in the past is there are people like orphanages, you know, as with orphanages, who are drawn to working with vulnerable people for evil
Mm.
reasons. So,
Yeah.
because that's the case, doesn't mean that it's not necessary to have a place where children can go if they don't have anywhere else to go, or people with
And if you need
mental.
evidence of that, you just need to read the open justice pages of, horrendous crimes of people who have used their power and influence that they have, particularly
Oh,
over the genuinely more vulnerable.
again,
And
it makes sense if you factor in that evil is its own thing, rather than
mm,
just a result of self-interest or market forces, or it seems to have its own animating force, and it seems to be growing somewhat stronger.
there you go. Right, we're going to head off now. I'm going to do all the feedback as a separate mailbag, so look out for that. If you want to send something in, 2057 is the text, inbox at rcr.media is the email. What are you off to for the rest of the week? You're going to do something positive whilst you're on your fast, hunger strike? Uh,
I
you know,
read I read that Winston Churchill liked bricklaying because it took his busy mind off what it was depressed about. And I'm not saying I'm depressed, but so I'm picking olives. There'll probably be carpets to clean. So yeah, but I've got to get picking while the picking's good.
there you go. Well, see that mindfulness. Mindfulness
Yeah,
is a thing. I mean, let's face it, we all
you're up a
remember
ladder.
those
You got to
colouring
stay
books.
mindful.
Well, and that's why I knit. People ask me about knitting. That is why I knit. Knitting is my mental downtime, as it were. And actually, speaking of, knitaugustnights.co.nz, if you go to that, slash, I think classes 2026, the classes for the Napier event here in New Zealand are now up. A little plug for my other little side hustle.
Oh, it
Yeah,
must be.
go and check that out. Yeah, well, this is just it, where I'm helping the world become a better place, Marty, one stitch at a time.
Yeah, good for you.
There you
Look
go.
out for
Hey,
some
look,
black
thank you.
ram's wool for me.
Oh, yes, you can. We did have this conversation about getting a jumper for you. If you find yourself some black ram's wool, I'll knit it, darling.
Well, I
I've
thought
told
you
you
had a
this.
whole company of buying ram's wool.
Oh,
Not anymore.
yes. Well, yeah, yes and no. But that's another story. All right,
Have to
people,
talk your
we
own.
are going to head off for another day. Thank you very much for joining us here with Media Matters. As always, we do appreciate your company. Thank you for our FMC members, because without you, we wouldn't be able to do this week in and week out. Marty, have a great week.
Thanks, Bree. Have a great week. Bye now.
Take care, everyone. Bye.